They told me I was confused again. They said my mind was playing tricks on me, that the disease had taken another piece of who I used to be. But I knew what I saw that morning when my daughter Sarah stood in my doorway with tears streaming down her face, telling me I could not come to her wedding. Not this wedding. Not the one she had been planning for months. The one I heard her talking about on the phone late at night, when she thought I was already asleep in my room down the hall. She said I would ruin everything, that I would embarrass her in front of all those people, that I could not be trusted to remember where I was or who anyone was, or what I might say out loud that should stay locked inside my confused mind. She said it with such pain in her voice, such terrible pain, and I wanted to reach out and hold her like I did when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. But my hands stayed frozen at my sides because part of me understood why she was afraid of me now. You know that feeling when someone you love looks at you like you are a stranger, like you are something broken that used to be whole, like you are a problem they have to solve instead of a person they cherish. You know it because you have seen it too in the eyes of your own children or your own spouse, or the people who used to know you before this disease started erasing you, one memory at a time. You have felt that terrible moment when they stop asking you what you think and start talking about you like you are not even in the room, when they make decisions for you without asking, when they smile that patient, sad smile that says they have already mourned the person you used to be. I see you nodding because you understand this loneliness, this particular kind of grief that comes from watching yourself disappear while you are still here, still breathing, still feeling everything even though they think you cannot feel anything anymore. My daughter Sarah was getting married again, you see, and I was not supposed to know about it because the last time I went to a family gathering, I apparently told her aunt something I should not have told anyone. Something about Sarah and her husband Tom, something I do not even remember saying, but everyone assures me I said it very loudly, right in the middle of dessert. They tell me I stood up at the table and announced that Tom was not who everyone thought he was, that there were secrets Sarah was keeping, that nothing about their marriage was real. I do not remember any of this. I only remember the way everyone went quiet, and the way Sarah's face turned white as snow, and the way she grabbed my arm and led me outside where she cried and cried, while I apologized for something I could not recall doing. That was 6 months ago. Since then, I have been living in this assisted living facility, where the walls are pale yellow, and the nurses speak to me in voices meant for children, and my daughter visits every Sunday, but never stays longer than an hour. When she told me about the wedding ban, standing there in my small room with the afternoon light coming through the window making her hair glow like it did when she was a little girl, I felt something crack open inside my chest. Not anger exactly, though there was some of that too. It was more like a deep knowing, a certainty that pushed up through all the fog and confusion in my mind. I knew in that moment that I had to be at that wedding. I knew that something was terribly wrong with the whole situation, something that went beyond my failing memory and my inappropriate comments and my embarrassing behavior. I knew it the way you know when you wake up in the middle of the night that something bad is going to happen, even though you cannot explain why you know it. It was the same feeling I had the night before my husband died, when I sat up in bed at 3 in the morning and knew with absolute certainty that our time was running out even though he seemed perfectly healthy. Sarah told me the wedding was in 3 weeks at a beautiful venue by the lake, the same lake where her father and I used to take her fishing when she was small enough to sit on his shoulders. She told me it would be a small ceremony, just close friends and family, and that she needed it to be perfect because this was her chance to start over, to get things right this time. She did not say what she was starting over from. She did not mention Tom, her husband, the man she married 5 years ago in a ceremony I do remember perfectly because I still have the photographs in the drawer beside my bed. She just kept saying this wedding, this ceremony, this new beginning, and I kept thinking how strange it was that she never once said his name. After she left that day, I sat in my chair by the window and watched the birds gathering on the power lines outside. My mind feels like those birds sometimes, all scattered and chaotic, landing and taking off without warning, never staying in one place long enough to make sense of the pattern. But in that moment, watching Sarah walk away from my building, with her shoulders hunched forward like she was carrying something too heavy, my thoughts were crystal clear. I picked up the phone book they keep in the common room, and I looked up Tom's number. My son-in-law Tom, who I have known for 5 years, who brings me flowers on Mother's Day, who fixed the loose railing on my front steps before I moved here, who has kind eyes and a gentle laugh. I called him, and when he answered, I said I needed to talk to him about something important, something about Sarah, and could he please come visit me soon? He came the next morning. He looked tired when he walked into the community room where I was waiting for him, like he had not been sleeping well, like there were worries eating at him from the inside. He hugged me the way he always does, warm and genuine, and he asked me how I was feeling and if the nurses were treating me well, and if I needed anything from the outside world. We sat down at one of the small tables near the window, and I looked at his face, really looked at it, searching for signs of whatever it was that made my daughter want to marry him again in secret, whatever it was that made her ban me from witnessing it. I asked him straight out if he knew Sarah was planning a wedding. The way his face changed told me everything I needed to know. He went very still and very pale, and his hands gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. That is when he told me the truth, or at least part of it, the part he thought I could handle in my confused state. He told me that he and Sarah were still married, that they had never divorced, that the story about them separating was something Sarah had told people to explain why they were not living together anymore. He told me it was complicated, that there were reasons he could not explain, that Sarah had asked him to go along with the fiction, and he had agreed because he loved her and wanted to protect her. He told me all of this in a quiet voice, while tears ran down his face, and I held his hand across the table, feeling like I was the one who needed to comfort him, even though I was the one who had been lied to, the one who had been deemed too sick to be trusted with the truth. I asked him who Sarah was marrying if she was already married to him. He looked away from me then, looked out the window at the same birds I had been watching the day before, and he said a name I did not recognize, Michael. She was marrying someone named Michael in 3 weeks, and apparently everyone knew about it except me, and apparently this Michael did not know that Sarah was already legally married to Tom, and apparently the whole thing was some kind of terrible mistake or plan or secret that was spiraling out of control. Tom told me he had tried to stop it, that he had begged Sarah to tell Michael the truth, to call off the ceremony, to get an actual divorce if that was what she really wanted, but she refused. She said she needed this wedding to happen, that it was the only way to fix everything, and when he asked her what everything meant, she just cried and told him he would understand later. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to really think about your answer because it matters, because you are not alone in this struggle, because your voice matters even when you feel invisible. Have you ever been told you are too confused to understand something important? Too sick to be included in decisions about people you love? Too far gone to have your feelings considered? Have you felt that terrible powerlessness when everyone around you decides what is best for you without asking what you want or need or feel? If this resonates with you, if you have felt this same pain of being pushed aside and silenced and treated like a child who cannot grasp adult complexities, I want you to type in the comments below, "I deserve to be heard and included." Type those exact words. I deserve to be heard and included. Because when you type that, you are not just speaking for yourself, you are speaking for everyone in our community who has been made to feel small and incompetent and invisible. You are telling your story and validating the stories of countless others who watch these videos and feel less alone because of people like you who have the courage to share. Type it now, before you forget, before the moment passes. I deserve to be heard and included. Let those words be your declaration that you still matter, that your voice still counts, that you are still here and still worthy of respect and dignity. After Tom left that day, I could not stop thinking about Sarah and this Michael person and the wedding that was not really a wedding, because how can you marry someone when you are already married to someone else? I thought about it while I ate my dinner in the dining hall, surrounded by other residents who chewed slowly and stared at their plates. I thought about it while I tried to sleep that night with the sounds of the building settling around me, the distant voices of night shift nurses, the hum of machines keeping everything running. I thought about my daughter, my beautiful daughter who I carried inside my body for 9 months, who I nursed and rocked and sang to sleep every night, who I watched grow from a tiny, helpless thing into a strong, independent woman. I thought about what could possibly make her do something so desperate and reckless and wrong. In the morning, I called Tom again, and I told him I was coming to the wedding, whether Sarah wanted me there or not. I told him I needed him to take me there, to bring me to the ceremony as his guest, to help me witness whatever was about to happen, because my gut told me it needed to be stopped, or at least understood. I expected him to argue with me, to tell me it was a bad idea, to remind me of my condition and how I might make things worse. But instead, he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said yes. He said he would pick me up the morning of the wedding and take me there and stay by my side the whole time. He said maybe I was right. Maybe I needed to be there. Maybe my presence would somehow change things, or at least force the truth into the open where it could not hide anymore. The 3 weeks that followed were the longest of my life. Every day I woke up afraid I would forget the plan, forget why it mattered, forget what I was supposed to do. I wrote myself notes and hid them in my drawer under my nightgowns. I practiced what I would say if anyone asked me why I was there. I imagined Sarah's face when she saw me, the shock and anger, and maybe somewhere underneath the relief that her mother cared enough to show up, even when told to stay away. I watched the calendar on my wall, crossing off each day with a red marker, counting down to the moment when everything would either make sense or fall apart completely. My memory has been particularly bad these past few months. I forget what I ate for breakfast before I finish eating it. I forget the names of the nurses who have been taking care of me for over a year. I forget sometimes where I am and why I am here, and who put me in this place with its yellow walls and its smell of disinfectant and cooked vegetables. But I did not forget about the wedding. Every single morning I woke up and remembered that Sarah was doing something terrible, something that would hurt people, something I had to try to stop, even though I did not fully understand what I was stopping or why. Tom came to visit me twice more before the wedding day. Once he brought me a new dress to wear, a soft blue thing that reminded me of the sky in summer, with buttons up the front that would be easy for my shaking hands to manage. He said I should look nice for the ceremony, that I should feel confident and strong, that whatever happened, I should know I was doing the right thing by being there. The second time he came, he brought photographs. Old photographs of Sarah as a baby, as a toddler, as a young woman on her actual wedding day to him 5 years ago. We looked at them together in silence, and I could see him trying not to cry, trying to hold himself together for my sake, even though he was the one who was falling apart. He told me more of the story during that visit, filling in pieces I had not understood or had forgotten since our first conversation. He told me that Sarah had been acting strange for almost a year, pulling away from him, spending long hours away from their home, being secretive with her phone and her schedule. He told me he thought at first she was having an affair, that she had fallen in love with someone else, and was working up the courage to ask for a divorce. He said he would have understood that, would have let her go if that was what she needed, because loving someone means wanting them to be happy, even when their happiness does not include you anymore. But when he finally confronted her about it, when he finally demanded to know what was going on, she told him something completely different. She told him she had made a terrible mistake, that she had gotten involved in something she should not have, that she needed to fix it before it destroyed both of their lives. She would not tell him what the mistake was. She would not explain what she was involved in, or why this wedding to Michael was the solution. She just kept saying she needed him to trust her, to let her do this one thing, and then everything would be okay again. She promised him that after the ceremony with Michael, after whatever happened that day, she would come back to him and they could start over for real. She made him promise not to tell anyone they were still married, not to interfere with her plans, not to show up at the wedding and cause a scene. And because he loved her, because he wanted to believe she knew what she was doing, he agreed. But now, 3 weeks later, with the ceremony approaching, he was starting to regret that promise. He was starting to think that maybe the kindest thing he could do for Sarah was to stop her from making this mistake, whatever it was, before it was too late. The night before the wedding, I barely slept at all. I lay in my bed, watching the shadows move across the ceiling as cars passed outside, their headlights sweeping through my window like searchlights looking for something lost. I thought about my husband, dead now for 7 years, and how he would know what to do in this situation. He always knew what to do. He had that calm, steady way of seeing through problems to their solutions, of understanding people's motivations even when they were hiding them. I wished I could ask him for advice, wished I could hear his voice one more time, telling me everything would work out fine, that I was worrying over nothing, that Sarah was a smart girl who could take care of herself. But he was gone, and I was here alone with my confused mind, and my fierce love for my daughter, and my determination to be at that wedding no matter what. Tom picked me up at 9 in the morning. The ceremony was not until 2 in the afternoon, but we wanted to get there early, to find a place where we could sit quietly in the back without drawing attention, to be present but not intrusive until the right moment came to make ourselves known. I had dressed carefully in the blue dress he brought me, had brushed my thin white hair until it lay flat against my skull, had put on the pearl earrings my husband gave me on our 25th anniversary. I wanted to look like someone who deserved to be there, someone who had every right to witness her daughter's wedding, even if that daughter had explicitly banned her from attending. The drive to the venue took 40 minutes through countryside that used to be familiar to me, but now seemed strange and new, like I was seeing it for the first time, or like I had forgotten I had seen it before. Tom did not talk much during the drive. He gripped the steering wheel with both hands and stared straight ahead at the road, and I could see the muscle in his jaw working like he was chewing on words he could not quite bring himself to say out loud. I wanted to comfort him, but I did not know how, did not know what to say that would make any of this better or easier or less complicated. So I just sat beside him in silence and watched the world go by outside my window and tried to prepare myself for whatever was about to happen. The venue was beautiful in that effortless way that costs a fortune to achieve. It sat right on the edge of the lake, a restored barn with white painted wood and huge windows that looked out over the water. There were flowers everywhere, white roses and lilies arranged in tall vases, petals scattered along the walkway leading to the entrance, garlands wrapped around the porch railings. A small crowd of people was already gathering, women in elegant dresses and men in dark suits, everyone laughing and chatting and sipping drinks from crystal glasses. Tom parked at the far end of the lot, and we sat in the car for a few minutes just watching, just breathing, just gathering our courage for what came next. When we finally walked toward the barn, I felt like I was moving through water, like every step took enormous effort and concentration. My legs felt weak, and my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and I kept thinking I might forget why I was there, might forget the whole plan and wander off confused and lost like everyone expected me to do. But Tom held my arm gently but firmly, guiding me forward, keeping me focused, and I held on to him like he was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting and changing around me. We slipped through the entrance while people were distracted by the arrival of what I assumed was the groom, a tall man with dark hair and an expensive suit who was shaking hands and accepting congratulations from the gathering guests. Inside the barn, it was cool and dim after the bright sunlight outside. Rows of white chairs faced a simple altar decorated with more flowers and white fabric that draped and flowed like water frozen in motion. Tom led me to seats in the very back row, the last two chairs on the end nearest the door, where we could see everything but where we might not be immediately visible to people looking forward toward the altar. We sat down and I folded my hands in my lap and tried to slow my breathing, tried to calm the panic rising in my chest, tried to remember that I had every right to be here because Sarah was my daughter and nothing, not even this disease eating my brain, could take away my right to love her and worry about her and want to protect her from harm. People filed in slowly, filling the seats from front to back, chattering and laughing and taking photographs with their phones. I recognized some faces from Sarah's actual wedding 5 years ago, aunts and uncles and cousins who smiled at me politely when they noticed me sitting there, but did not seem to question my presence. Maybe they assumed Sarah had changed her mind about banning me. Maybe they did not know I had been banned in the first place. Maybe my presence seemed so unlikely that their brains simply could not process it, and they moved past me without really registering what they were seeing. Tom sat rigid beside me, his hands gripping his knees, his eyes fixed on the altar where our daughter would soon stand and promise herself to a man who did not know she was already married. The music started, and everyone stood. Sarah appeared at the back of the barn on the arm of her uncle, my younger brother, who had agreed to walk her down the aisle in place of her father, who could not be there to do it himself. She looked absolutely radiant, in a white dress that hugged her figure and then flowed out in layers of delicate lace, her hair swept up in an elegant twist, her face glowing with something that might have been happiness or might have been terror disguised as happiness. She was looking straight ahead toward Michael, who waited for her at the altar with a smile that made him look younger than his years, eager and hopeful, and completely unaware that his entire future was built on a lie. I watched my daughter walk down that aisle, and I felt Tom tense beside me, felt him holding his breath like he might call out to her or stand up and stop the whole thing right then and there. But he stayed silent and still, and Sarah kept walking, her eyes never wavering from Michael's face, never glancing to the sides where she might have seen her mother sitting in the back row where she absolutely was not supposed to be. The ceremony began with the officiant welcoming everyone and talking about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage, words that felt hollow and wrong because how could any of this be sacred when it was founded on deception? They got to the part where the officiant asks if anyone objects to the marriage, that moment that exists in every ceremony, but that no one ever actually uses because it is just a formality, just a tradition left over from times when marriages were business arrangements that needed to be legally sound. I felt Tom shift beside me and I knew he was considering it, considering standing up and saying yes. I object. She is my wife and this is not legal and you need to stop this right now before someone gets hurt. But before he could move, before he could make that decision, Sarah's voice rang out clear and strong in the quiet barn. She said she needed to say something before they went any further. She said she had not been completely honest with Michael, that there were things he did not know about her past, about her present, about who she really was. The barn went absolutely silent. Michael's smile faltered and confusion crossed his face. Sarah turned to look at the gathered guests, and that is when she finally saw me sitting in the back row next to Tom, her husband, her actual legal husband, who she had asked to stay away. Our eyes met across the distance, and I saw shock flash across her face, followed by something else, something that looked almost like relief. She told the whole room that she was still married to Tom. She told them that everything they thought they knew about her divorce was a lie. She told them she had been living a double life for the past year, keeping her marriage secret while pursuing a relationship with Michael, and that she had planned this wedding as a way to force herself to finally make a choice between the two men she loved. She said she thought if she went through with marrying Michael, if she stood at an altar and made vows in front of all these people, that would somehow make it real and final and irreversible, that would somehow give her the courage to actually divorce Tom and start fresh. But standing there in that moment, seeing both of them in the same room, seeing me in the back row bearing witness to her deception, she realized she could not go through with it. If you have stayed with me this far through this story, if you have listened to every word and felt every emotion right alongside me, then I want you to know something important. This channel exists for you, for people like us who understand what it means to feel confused and lost and pushed aside, but who also understand what it means to love fiercely and fight for the people who matter most. Every video I share here is another story, another moment of connection, another reminder that you are not alone in this journey through memory loss and family complications, and the messy, beautiful reality of being human. If you want to be part of this community, if you want to find comfort and understanding and stories that validate your own experiences, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Not because I am trying to sell you anything or pressure you into something you do not want, but because I genuinely believe we are stronger together than we are alone. Each new video brings hope and connection and the reassurance that someone out there understands exactly what you are going through. Click that subscribe button as an act of joining a family that sees you and values you and knows that your story matters just as much as anyone else's. Michael stood at the altar looking like someone had punched him in the stomach, his face white and his hands trembling at his sides. He asked Sarah if this was some kind of joke, if she was serious, if she really expected him to believe she had orchestrated this entire wedding just to help herself make a decision about which man she wanted to be with. Sarah started crying then, tears running down her face and ruining her carefully applied makeup, and she told him she was so sorry, that she never meant to hurt him, that she had convinced herself this was the only way to finally move forward with her life, instead of staying frozen in fear and indecision. She told him he deserved so much better than what she had given him, that he deserved someone who could love him completely without reservation or doubt, and that person was not her, and probably would never be her. The barn erupted in noise then, people standing up and talking over each other and demanding explanations. Sarah's uncle, who had walked her down the aisle, was shouting at Tom, asking how he could let this happen, how he could let Sarah humiliate herself and Michael and everyone who had come to witness this ceremony. Some of Michael's family members were moving towards Sarah with anger on their faces, wanting answers and apologies and some kind of accountability for the pain she had just caused. The officiant stood frozen at the altar like he had never encountered this situation in any training or manual and had no idea how to proceed. It was chaos, pure chaos, and in the middle of it all, Sarah stood perfectly still with tears streaming down her face looking directly at me. Tom stood up from our seats in the back and started moving toward Sarah, pushing through the confused and angry crowd, and I stood up to follow him because I was not going to let my daughter face this alone, no matter how badly she had messed up or how many people she had hurt. But before we could reach her, before Tom could wrap his arms around his wife and shield her from the judgment and rage of the crowd, Sarah held up her hand to stop us. She said she needed to tell everyone the rest of the truth, the part that explained everything, the part that would make this whole terrible situation finally make sense. She told us that 6 months ago she had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease, the same disease that was slowly taking me away from myself and from everyone who loved me. She told us that when the doctor first gave her the diagnosis, she went into a kind of panic, a desperate, frantic need to control something in her life when everything felt like it was spiraling beyond her control. She told us she had read that I was in the early stages of the same disease when I married her father, that I had built a life and a family and decades of memories before the symptoms became severe, and she wanted that for herself. She wanted to fall in love and get married and experience all the normal milestones of life before her mind started to fail her the way mine was failing me. But she was already married to Tom. She already had that life she was so desperate to build before it was too late. So why Michael? Why the elaborate deception and the secret wedding and the lies told to everyone, including her own husband? Sarah looked at Tom when she explained this part, her voice breaking with emotion, and she said that every time she looked at him, she saw her future. She saw herself forgetting his name and forgetting their wedding day and forgetting all the love they had built together. She saw herself becoming a burden to him the way I had become a burden to her. Saw herself deteriorating in front of his eyes while he watched helpless and heartbroken. Saw their marriage turning into a caretaking arrangement instead of a partnership. She said she could not bear to do that to him, could not bear to trap him in a relationship where he would spend the best years of his life taking care of a wife who did not even remember who he was. So she invented the divorce story. She pulled away from Tom and told people they had separated and started building a new life where she could pretend the diagnosis did not exist. She met Michael at a support group for people with early-onset dementia, a group she attended once and then never went back to because facing her diagnosis directly was too painful. Michael had been recently diagnosed too, and they bonded over their shared fear and anger and grief. They started dating in that intense, desperate way that people do when they feel like time is running out, when every moment feels precious because there might not be many moments left. Michael proposed after 3 months, and Sarah said yes, because she wanted to believe she could have a normal life with someone who understood her situation, someone who was facing the same slow decline, someone she would not feel guilty about burdening because he was already burdened with his own failing mind. But planning the wedding forced her to confront what she was really doing. It forced her to admit that she was not actually divorced from Tom, that she was trying to marry someone else while still legally bound to the man she truly loved, that she was running away from her fear instead of facing it with the partner who had promised to stand by her in sickness and in health. She kept thinking she would call it off, would tell Michael the truth, would go back to Tom and admit everything and beg for forgiveness. But every time she tried to say the words out loud, her courage failed her, and she pushed forward with the plans, telling herself that once the ceremony happened, she would have no choice but to commit to this new path. Seeing me in the back row changed everything for her. Seeing her mother, who she had banned from the wedding because she was ashamed of my confusion and my inappropriate comments, and my visible evidence of what Alzheimer's disease does to a person, seeing me there anyway with Tom by my side bearing witness to her choices, made her realize that running away from the disease was not going to save her from it. She said looking at me was like looking into a mirror that showed her future, and instead of feeling terrified like she expected, she felt grateful. Grateful that she still had time to make better choices. Grateful that she could still recognize the people she loved and tell them the truth. Grateful that her mother cared enough to show up even when told to stay away, because that was what real love looked like. Messy and complicated and refusing to give up even when things got hard. Michael sank down into a chair in the front row with his head in his hands. People in the crowd were crying now, the anger draining away as they began to understand the impossible situation Sarah had been trying to navigate alone. Tom reached Sarah finally and pulled her into his arms, and she collapsed against him sobbing, all the fear and lies and desperate pretending finally pouring out of her in great heaving gasps. I moved toward them slowly, my old legs carrying me down the aisle past all those beautiful flowers and all those shocked faces, and when I reached my daughter, I put my hand on her back and felt her shaking under my palm. She turned to me then and said she was sorry. Sorry for banning me from the wedding. Sorry for being ashamed of my condition. Sorry for not understanding until this moment that I was not a burden or an embarrassment, but a reminder of what it means to keep loving even when loving gets difficult and scary. She said, watching me these past months lose pieces of myself, but still show up for her in whatever way I could, still try to take care of her even when I could barely take care of myself, had taught her more about commitment and marriage and real love than any ceremony or vows or promises ever could. She said she wanted to be like me, wanted to face her diagnosis with the same stubborn refusal to disappear quietly, wanted to fight for her relationships even when her brain was working against her. Tom told her they would face it together, that he was not going anywhere, that his vows meant in sickness and in health, and he had meant every word when he said them 5 years ago. He told her he was angry about the lies and hurt by her pulling away and confused about why she thought protecting him from her disease was more important than trusting him to make his own choices about their marriage. But he also told her he understood the fear, understood the desperate need to control something when everything else felt out of control, and he forgave her because that was what you did when you loved someone enough to build a life with them. Michael eventually stood up and approached Sarah and Tom and me standing there at the altar where he was supposed to be getting married. He looked devastated, but also somehow lighter, like a weight had been lifted even though the weight had been replaced with heartbreak. He told Sarah he was angry and hurt, and felt incredibly betrayed, but he also told her he was grateful she had stopped the ceremony before they made legal vows that would have bound them in lies. He said he hoped she would find peace with her diagnosis and her marriage, and then he walked out of the barn with his family following behind him, leaving the rest of us standing in the wreckage of the ceremony that never was. The other guests slowly filed out too, some stopping to hug Sarah or Tom or me, some just leaving quietly without saying anything because what was there to say to a situation this complicated and painful and strange? Eventually, it was just the three of us standing in the empty barn with all those flowers and decorations that represented a wedding that would never be completed. Sarah suggested we go outside and sit by the lake, the same lake where she used to fish with her father, and we walked out into the afternoon sunshine and found a bench overlooking the water. We sat there for a long time not talking, just being together in the quiet. Sarah held Tom's hand on one side and my hand on the other, linking the three of us together in a chain of connection that felt stronger than any ceremony or vows. She told us about her diagnosis in more detail, about the tests they ran and the appointments she attended alone, and the terror she felt when the doctor explained what the next years would likely look like for her. She told us about the support group where she met Michael, about how desperate she had been to find someone who understood what she was facing, about how guilty she felt for pulling away from Tom, who would have understood if she had just given him the chance. Tom told her about the last 6 months from his perspective, about the loneliness of being pushed away by someone you love, about the helpless feeling of watching your partner suffer and not being allowed to help, about the relief he felt now that the truth was finally out in the open, even though the truth was hard and scary. He told her they would figure it out together, would find doctors and support groups and coping strategies as a team instead of her trying to manage everything alone. He promised her he would be patient when she forgot things, would help her remember the important moments, would love her through all the stages of the disease no matter how difficult they became. I told them about my own experience with Alzheimer's, about the fear and confusion and grief of losing yourself piece by piece, but also about the unexpected moments of clarity and connection that still break through the fog. I told Sarah that having this disease does not mean your life is over, does not mean you cannot still experience joy and love and purpose. I told her that I am still here, still her mother, still capable of showing up when it matters, even if I cannot always remember why it matters, or what I did yesterday, or what I will do tomorrow. I told her the disease takes memories, but it cannot take love, cannot erase the fundamental bond between a mother and daughter, cannot destroy the part of us that recognizes each other at a level deeper than names or facts, or chronological recall. We sat by that lake until the sun started to set, painting the water in shades of orange and pink and purple. Sarah leaned her head on Tom's shoulder and held my hand tight like she was afraid if she let go, I might disappear or forget this moment, or forget her. But I will not forget this. Not completely, not the important parts. I might not remember the details tomorrow or next week or next month. I might not remember the name of the venue or what dress Sarah was wearing or exactly what words we said to each other. But I will remember that my daughter needed me, and I showed up, that we sat together by the water and faced hard truths and chose love over fear. The twist in this story is not what you might expect. It is not that Sarah was trying to commit bigamy, or that Michael was secretly awful, or that there was some dramatic revelation that changed everything in an instant. The twist is that sometimes the people we think are too confused to understand are actually the ones who see things most clearly. The twist is that I showed up to stop a wedding and instead I helped my daughter stop running from the truth about herself. The twist is that my Alzheimer's disease, the thing that made Sarah ban me from her ceremony because she was ashamed of what I represented, ended up being the very thing that gave her the courage to face her own diagnosis with honesty and hope. The twist is that we are still married, Sarah and Tom, just like they were always married even when she was pretending otherwise. And I am still her mother, still present in her life, still capable of showing up and making a difference, even when everyone expects me to be too far gone to matter. The disease will take more from me as time goes on, will take more from Sarah too, but it cannot take this moment, or the love that brought us together by that lake, or the truth that real family shows up for each other even when showing up is hard and complicated and scary. So here is what I want you to understand as we reach the end of this story. You are not invisible. Your confusion does not make you worthless. Your failing memory does not erase your value to the people who love you. You can still make a difference, can still show up, can still be the person who changes everything just by being present and refusing to accept that you are too broken to matter. Sarah thought banning me from her wedding would protect everyone from my embarrassing behavior, but my presence there, my refusal to accept being pushed aside, gave her the courage she needed to stop running from her fear and start facing her future with the support of people who love her. If this story touched you, if you felt seen and understood and less alone in your own journey with this terrible disease, then I hope you will come back to this channel for more stories. I hope you will subscribe and join our community of people who refuse to disappear quietly, who fight to stay present and connected even when our brains are working against us, who know that love persists even when memory fades. We need each other in this fight. We need to share our stories and our struggles and our small victories so that none of us has to face this alone. Subscribe, not because I am asking you to, but because you deserve to be part of something bigger than yourself, something that validates your experience and reminds you that you matter, that you are still here, that you are still worthy of love and respect and dignity no matter what this disease takes from you. And if you found value in this story, if it gave you hope or comfort or a different perspective on what it means to live with Alzheimer's, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment telling me about your own experience, about the moments when you showed up even when you were told you were too confused to help, about the times when your presence made a difference even though you thought you were invisible. Your stories matter. Your voice matters. You matter. And I will be here sharing more stories, more moments of truth and connection, because we are in this together, and together we are stronger than this disease could ever make us alone. The weeks that followed that canceled wedding became some of the most important of my life, even though I know I will eventually forget most of the details, even though the memories are already starting to blur at the edges, like watercolors running together in the rain. Sarah moved back in with Tom, and they started going to counseling together. Not marriage counseling exactly because their marriage had never really been in question, but therapy to help them navigate the reality of facing a devastating diagnosis as a team. She invited me to join them for some sessions, and I sat in that small office with its comfortable chairs and soft lighting, and I told the therapist about my own journey with this disease, about the fear and frustration, and the strange moments of unexpected peace. Sarah asked me questions during those sessions that she had never asked before. Questions about what it felt like when I first started noticing the memory loss, about how I coped with the terror of realizing my mind was betraying me, about whether I ever regretted building a life and having a family knowing that someday I might not remember any of it. I told her the truth, that yes, sometimes I did regret it. Sometimes I wished I had never loved anyone because then there would be no one to lose when my memories disappeared, no one to hurt with my confusion and my repetitive questions and my vacant stares. But most of the time I was grateful for every single moment, grateful for the years with my husband and the experience of being Sarah's mother and all the ordinary beautiful moments that filled my life before this disease started taking them away. I told her that love is always worth it, even when you know it will end in loss. Even when you know the ending will be painful and difficult and full of grief. I told her that choosing not to love Tom fully because she was afraid of burdening him with her illness would be choosing to lose him by her own hand instead of by the disease's hand, and that seemed like the greater tragedy. At least if she let him love her through the progression of Alzheimer's, at least if she gave him the chance to be her partner in facing this terrible thing, then they would have whatever time remained to be truly together instead of separated by fear and lies. Tom sat beside Sarah during these sessions, holding her hand, and I could see the way he looked at her had not changed at all, despite everything she had put him through, despite the deception and the almost marriage to another man, and the months of being pushed away without explanation. He still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world, like he would do anything to protect her, like her diagnosis was something they would face together without question or hesitation. That look reminded me of how my husband used to look at me before he died. That expression of absolute commitment and tender devotion that says, I am here, and I am not leaving no matter what comes. Sarah started attending a different support group, one specifically for people with early onset Alzheimer's and their caregivers. Tom went with her and they met other couples facing the same terrifying future, other young people watching their minds slowly deteriorate, other partners learning how to love someone through progressive memory loss. She told me about a woman in the group who was only 38 years old, younger than Sarah, who could no longer remember her children's names but could still feel the love she had for them, like a physical presence in her chest. She told me about a man who forgot how to read, but who still sat every evening with books in his lap, because the feel of the pages and the weight of the volume in his hands brought him comfort, even when the words made no sense to him anymore. These stories helped Sarah understand that her life was not over, that the diagnosis was not a death sentence even though it felt like one, that there were still years ahead where she could love and be loved and experience joy and connection and purpose. She started keeping a journal where she wrote down the important moments of each day, not trusting her memory to hold on to them, but wanting to create a record she could return to when the fog got too thick. She wrote about the sessions with the therapist and the meetings with her support group and the quiet evenings at home with Tom when they cooked dinner together and talked about their fears and their hopes and their plans for the time they had left. She also wrote about me, about our relationship and how it had changed since her diagnosis, about how seeing me struggle with the same disease gave her both terror and comfort in equal measure. She wrote that watching me forget things did scare her because it showed her what was coming, showed her the stages she would eventually pass through, the abilities she would eventually lose, but it also showed her that I was still here, still present, still capable of love and connection and showing up when it mattered, and that gave her hope that even in the worst stages of the disease, she might still be able to experience moments of clarity and recognition and genuine human connection. I started visiting Sarah and Tom at their home once a week, a routine they established to give us regular time together while I could still reliably remember who they were and why they mattered to me. We would have dinner together on Sunday evenings, and afterwards we would sit in their living room and Sarah would read to me from her journal, sharing the moments she had recorded over the past week. She read me descriptions of conversations we had that I no longer remembered, details about visits I had made that had completely slipped from my mind, observations about my behavior and my mood that helped me understand myself better because I could no longer trust my own recollection of events. These readings became precious to me because they gave me back pieces of my life that the disease had stolen. I could not remember the conversation Sarah described having with me about my husband's death and how I coped with the grief, but hearing her read the words I had apparently said allowed me to access feelings and truths that were still inside me, even if the memory of expressing them was gone. It was like she was building a bridge for me between the person I used to be and the person I was becoming, helping me maintain some continuity of self, even as my brain worked to erase that continuity day by day and moment by moment. Tom started doing something similar with photographs. He created albums for me with pictures from throughout my life, carefully labeled with dates and names and brief descriptions of what was happening in each image. He made sure to include recent photos, too, pictures from the past few months and weeks, so I could see visual evidence that my life was continuing even when I could not remember it continuing. There were photos of me at their house for Sunday dinner, photos of me sitting in the garden at my assisted living facility, photos of the three of us together at the lake on the day of the canceled wedding. Looking at these images helped anchor me in time, helped me understand where I had been and where I was now, even when my internal sense of chronology had completely collapsed. One evening during our weekly dinner, Sarah told me she had reached out to Michael to apologize again for the pain she had caused him, and to make sure he was doing okay after the disaster of the wedding day. She said he had been kind but distant, that he accepted her apology, but made it clear he had no interest in maintaining any kind of relationship with her. He told her he was working through his own feelings about his diagnosis with a new therapist and a different support group, one where he felt he could be honest about what had happened without the complication of her presence. She said she understood and respected his need for distance, that she hoped he would find peace and love and whatever support he needed to face his disease with courage and dignity. She also told me that the experience with Michael had taught her something important about herself, something she might not have learned otherwise. She said that trying to run from her diagnosis by building a new life with someone who did not know her history had been an attempt to escape herself, to become someone without a past who could start fresh without the weight of who she used to be. But standing at that altar preparing to make vows to a man who only knew the version of her she had carefully constructed, she realized that she did not want to be a person without a past. She wanted to be Sarah, who had been married to Tom for 5 years. Sarah, whose mother was slowly losing her mind to Alzheimer's. Sarah, who had built a whole life full of memories and experiences and relationships that mattered deeply, even if she would eventually forget them. She said that accepting her diagnosis meant accepting all of herself, not just the parts she wished were different or better or less frightening. It meant acknowledging that, yes, she was someone with a progressive neurological disease that would eventually rob her of her memories and her independence and her ability to care for herself. But she was also someone who was loved fiercely by a husband who refused to abandon her, someone who had a mother who showed up for her even when explicitly told to stay away, someone who was brave enough to stand at an altar in front of dozens of people and tell the truth about her lies, even though it meant humiliating herself and hurting someone she cared about. All of these things were part of who she was, and running from the difficult parts meant running from the beautiful parts too. I understood what she meant because I had gone through something similar when my own symptoms started becoming undeniable. There was a period where I tried to hide my confusion from everyone, where I made excuses for my memory lapses and avoided situations where my cognitive decline might be obvious. I pretended I was fine, that nothing was wrong, that I was just getting older and everyone gets a little forgetful as they age. But pretending took so much energy, required so much effort to maintain the facade, that I had no energy left for actually living my life or enjoying the time I had left before the disease progressed further. When I finally stopped pretending, when I finally admitted to my family and my doctors and myself that something was seriously wrong with my brain, I felt both terrified and relieved. Terrified of what was coming, but relieved that I did not have to exhaust myself trying to appear normal anymore. Sarah seemed to be experiencing that same mixture of terror and relief now that the truth about her diagnosis was out in the open, and she could stop performing normalcy for everyone around her. She could admit when she forgot things instead of making up explanations or changing the subject. She could ask for help instead of struggling alone. She could talk about her fears instead of keeping them locked inside where they grew larger and more monstrous in the darkness of her own mind. Tom told me that since coming clean about everything, Sarah seemed lighter somehow, less burdened, more present in their daily life together, even as she faced the reality of an incredibly difficult future. The months passed, and I watched Sarah and Tom build a new kind of life together, one structured around the reality of her diagnosis, rather than in spite of it. They installed reminder systems throughout their house, calendars and notes and labels on drawers and cabinets to help Sarah navigate her space when her memory failed her. They established routines that would remain consistent even as her condition progressed, predictable rhythms to each day that would provide comfort and orientation when everything else became confusing. They made plans for the future that included contingencies for Sarah's declining abilities, discussing what kind of care she would need and when, talking about in-home help versus assisted living facilities versus memory care units, having the difficult conversations while she was still capable of expressing her wishes clearly. I helped them with these planning conversations because I had already been through some of the stages they were preparing for. I could tell them what it felt like to move from my house into assisted living, what I wished I had known before making that transition, What items and routines and familiar things brought me comfort in a new environment? I could describe the experience of needing help with basic tasks like managing medications or remembering to eat meals. What kind of assistance felt supportive versus what felt infantilizing or degrading? I could share what I had learned about maintaining dignity and personhood, even as my independence decreased, about the importance of having people around me who saw me as a whole person rather than just a collection of symptoms and deficits. These conversations were painful for all of us, but they were also necessary, and in a strange way, they brought us closer together. We were facing the reality of progressive dementia as a family unit, pooling our experiences and knowledge and love to create the best possible path forward. Tom told me once that having me involved in the planning made him feel less alone, less like he was the only one who understood what was coming, less isolated in his role as Sarah's primary support. He said knowing that I had walked this path before him and that I was still here, still capable of offering guidance and wisdom even with my compromised memory, gave him hope that he could do this, that he and Sarah could face whatever came together without being destroyed by it. Sarah's symptoms progressed slowly over the following year. Subtle changes that might not be obvious to someone who did not know her well, but that were clear to those of us who loved her and spent time with her regularly. She started having trouble finding words, pausing in the middle of sentences to search for a term that used to come easily, sometimes giving up and using a different word, or just trailing off and hoping the listener could infer her meaning. She began repeating herself more often, telling the same story twice in one conversation, or asking questions she had already asked and received answers to just minutes before. She had episodes of confusion where she forgot what day it was or what she had been planning to do, moments where she seemed to lose track of time and place in a way that frightened her because she could feel her grip on reality slipping. But there were also long stretches where she seemed completely fine, where her memory and cognition appeared unaffected, where she was fully present and engaged and capable. During these good periods, she would work on projects to preserve her memories and her sense of self for the time when she could no longer do it herself. She made video recordings where she talked about her life and her values and her relationships, creating a library of herself that she and Tom could return to later when she might not remember the things she was saying. She wrote letters to Tom for him to open at different future milestones, birthdays and anniversaries and difficult moments, letters where she told him how much she loved him and how grateful she was that he stayed with her, and how she hoped he would forgive her for the burden her illness would eventually place on him. She also wrote letters to me, letters she read aloud during our Sunday dinners, because she wanted me to hear the words while I could still fully understand them. She told me I was the bravest person she knew, that watching me face my disease with dignity and grace, and stubborn refusal to disappear, had taught her how to face her own diagnosis without giving up entirely. She told me she was sorry for being ashamed of my condition, for banning me from her wedding, for treating my presence as an embarrassment rather than a gift. She told me that showing up that day despite being explicitly told to stay away was one of the greatest acts of love anyone had ever shown her, that it had changed the entire trajectory of her life by giving her the courage to stop running from the truth. I cried when she read me those letters, tears running down my wrinkled cheeks while Sarah held my hand across their dinner table. I told her I did not remember being brave, did not remember making a conscious choice to attend her wedding, that in my recollection I simply went because I loved her and could not bear to miss such an important moment in her life. I told her that if my presence there had helped her in some way, then I was grateful, but that I could not take credit for being heroic or courageous when I was just doing what mothers do, just showing up for their daughters because not showing up was unthinkable regardless of whether it was allowed or appropriate or convenient. Tom documented all of this, our Sunday dinners and our conversations and the letters Sarah wrote, creating his own archive of this period in our lives. He told me he was doing it partly for Sarah, so she would have a record of her own thoughts and feelings during the early stages of her disease, but also for himself, so he would remember this time when it was over, when Sarah had progressed beyond the point of having these kinds of conversations, and he needed reminders of who she had been and what they had shared. He said that watching me helped him understand that loving someone with Alzheimer's meant loving them in every stage, loving the person they are now and the person they used to be, and the person they will become, holding all of those versions simultaneously in your heart without wishing any of them away. The staff at my assisted living facility noticed changes in me too during this period. I was more engaged, more present, more connected to my life and my relationships than I had been in a long time. The nurses commented that I seemed happier, that I talked more about my daughter and my son-in-law, that I had a sense of purpose that had been missing before. My doctor adjusted my medications and ran new tests, but could not find any medical explanation for the improvement in my mood and cognitive function. The truth was that having Sarah and Tom so actively involved in my life, having weekly dinners and regular visits and meaningful conversations, was giving my brain more stimulation and my heart more reason to fight against the fog that wanted to consume me. Having a purpose, even a small one like showing up for Sunday dinner and sharing my experiences with my daughter who was facing the same disease, made an enormous difference in my quality of life. I was not just existing in my small room waiting to forget more things. I was participating in something larger than myself, contributing to my daughter's journey in a meaningful way, offering wisdom and support born from my own struggles. This sense of mattering, of still having value despite my compromised mind, kept me more anchored in reality than any medication or therapy could achieve. But I also knew that my good period would not last forever, that eventually my disease would progress to stages where I could no longer show up for Sunday dinner, or remember who Sarah was, or recognize Tom when he came to visit me. I knew there would come a time when I would be the one in need of constant care and patience and reminders about basic facts of my life, when I would be asking the same questions over and forgetting the answers immediately, when I would wake up confused and frightened in a room I did not recognize surrounded by people whose faces meant nothing to me. This future scared me terribly, but knowing that Sarah and Tom would be there for me the way I was trying to be there for Sarah now gave me some comfort, some faith that I would not face the worst stages of this disease entirely alone or entirely without love. Sarah and I talked about this explicitly one Sunday when Tom had stepped out to take a phone call, and we were alone together in their living room. She told me she was terrified of reaching the advanced stages of Alzheimer's, terrified of becoming completely dependent on others for everything, terrified of losing not just her memories, but her personality and her ability to recognize the people she loved. I told her I felt the same fear, that it haunted my nights and crept into my thoughts during quiet moments, that there was no way to make that fear go away completely because it was based on a very real and very terrible future that was coming for both of us. But I also told her that fear was not the whole story. I told her that even in my worst moments of confusion and disorientation, even when I could not remember my own name or understand where I was, there were still flickers of something deeper than memory, some essential core of who I was that the disease could not quite reach. I told her about moments when I looked at photographs and felt waves of emotion even though I could not identify the people in the pictures, about times when someone sang a song and I felt myself responding to it with joy or sadness or nostalgia, even though I had no conscious recollection of ever hearing it before. I told her that love might be stronger than memory, that the bond between people might exist at a level deeper than the brain's ability to recall names and faces and specific events. She asked me if I truly believed that, or if I was just trying to make her feel better about the future, just offering false comfort in the face of an uncomfortably reality. I thought about her question carefully before answering, because I did not want to lie to her, did not want to paint an unrealistically optimistic picture of what we were both facing. I told her that I did believe it based on my own experience, based on the fact that even when I could not remember having a daughter, I still felt pulled toward her when she visited, still experienced a sense of rightness and safety in her presence, still responded to her voice and her touch with something that felt like recognition, even if I could not consciously place her in the context of my life. The disease was taking my explicit memories, but it had not yet taken my implicit sense of connection to the people who mattered most. And I hoped that would remain true even in the final stages when everything else was gone. Thank you for listening to my story about the wedding that was not a wedding, about the daughter who thought she had to run from her future, about the mother who showed up anyway and changed everything just by being there. Thank you for seeing me and hearing me and allowing me to see and hear you through this connection we share. Until the next story, take care of yourself and remember that you are never as lost as you think you are, never as gone as others might assume, never too far from mattering to the people who truly love you.